Okay, so cards on the table. I'm not convinced that anyone needed to make a sequel to The Exorcist. Having said that, it is not a surprise to me that The Exorcist Believer beat everything else at the box office. Today on the podcast, why audiences still can't get enough of The Exorcist. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Okay, I'll admit, when I hear this, my spine does tingle.
Somewhere between science and superstition, there is another world. The world of darkness. The one hope. The only hope. The Exorcist.
That's not comforting at all. It's been 50 years since the original Exorcist came out, and now there's a new Exorcist movie in theaters that's in theaters right now. Look, the reviews are terrible. Okay? But it still got number one at the box office this past weekend. Matt Hart saw it. Jen Sookfong Lee saw it. They're both massive horror fans, and they've seen this new Exorcist. Matt, Jen, welcome to the group chat. What's good, everybody?
Nothing, man. Just reeling after the Exorcist by name alone sequel here.
Jen, what about you? Is that the vibe too?
I mean, that little audio clip, that one just sent me right back. I love it.
I do feel like before we even get into talking about The Exorcist Believer, we kind of maybe need to define our terms, because there are people who love scary movies and there are people who I will professionally call wimps. Yes. And I'm among the wimps.
Yeah.
I'm proudly among the wimps. Some people just like don't get horror. They go like, what is a good horror movie? I don't understand because I don't engage with it. Matt, you're a fan of the genre.
Yes.
What makes for a good horror movie?
Well, I mean, it can be a lot of things. For me, it's something that leaves me unsettled. I don't like to feel dirty.
Oh, okay.
I don't like to feel dirty, like a shower after it. You know, there's that kind of like the torture-y stuff. I don't really go for that.
Yeah.
But I do genuinely like to feel something afterwards. And a good movie makes you feel something, whether that's like a comedy makes you laugh like crazy.
Yeah.
Horror makes you scared, whatever. You should feel something at the end of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a successful horror movie, is something that makes you feel like, oh, I shouldn't have seen that. I shouldn't have done that. What am I doing here? What am I doing with my life?
Jen, part of the reason that I don't see horror movies is that when a horror movie is good, I don't sleep for several days. And I just kind of go, okay, there goes my sleep. That is, I'm not going to be able to get to bed. What makes a good horror movie for you?
My favorite kinds of horror movies are the ones that take things that we're very comfortable with, very familiar with, things that we might hold very dear to our hearts, and makes them super creepy crawly and messes us up. That's my favorite thing. So like if you like babies, it does something weird with babies, whatever it is.
What's the new one? There's a Slaughterhouse about a sloth.
Sorry?
There's a movie called Slaughterhouse that just came out about a sloth that's on a rampage. So,
like a sloth.
A sloth.
Everyone
the
loves
the animal.
sloths.
Yeah.
I would never root
sloths.
against a sloth. You can't convince me that, okay, wow.
Oh, this sloth, he's a real son of a... I'll tell you what.
Okay, I'm never going to watch Slaughterhouse. I'm out on that one.
Me too.
Okay, now that we got that out of the way, I just want to play a clip from the new Exorcist movie. It features Ellen Burstyn, who played the mom in the original.
Exorcism is a ritual. Every culture, every religion, they all use different methods. It's going to take all of them.
Don't be scared.
We've met before.
Mother.
No, it's a no from me. just based on that alone. Matt, what'd you think? How does the new Exorcist compare with the original?
Well, it will be on the title of my invoice that I send over to you for the screening procedure.
Yikes.
Yeah, no, it was not great. I was just personally, it didn't really do it for me.
Okay.
And the reason why this is because I think The Exorcist, the original, wasn't scary to me until I became older, because in this era of like these classic horror movies, The Omen, I would say even Pet Sematary, you're looking at movies that when you were young, you couldn't really deal with these huge decisions these people were making. Like The Exorcist, you're seeing Regan turn from this angelic kid into this literal bile spewing demon.
Cool.
And you're
you love that. And
well,
you
no, you're watching the parent because
Yeah.
I've got kids and I watch and I think seeing your kid in medical distress where they have the spinal taps she has to go through, and that's a lot of the horror in it, is watching someone transform for the worse.
Yeah.
Or the one priest who's fighting with his own mother's own dementia. So you're watching as a kid these huge adult problems, and you've never been trained to deal with this stuff. So you're like, seeing an adult in peril is almost the same as now when we're adults and we see children in peril, where we're empathetic
It's
to that.
distressing to you
It's
to
very
watch that.
distressing, yeah. But I mean, you can do it under the kind of like cotton swabs around you of it being a movie.
Right. The whole time that you're watching a movie, you're like, there's someone out there with a boom mic. That is it's like a comforting thought.
There's a best boy in the room. I know that.
This is my comfort tool. Is like every time that I'm scared in a movie, I go like, someone is yelling "cut" right after this. I don't know who it is, but they're just off in the corner, and this is just a silly little room. Jen, for you, how does a new Exorcist compare to the original?
Honestly, I found it a bit boring, which is
okay. All right.
It did not do anything unexpected. If you've seen the first Exorcist, which most of us have, this one is kind of just trading on the same stuff. But the difference is that I think what made the original Exorcist so horrifying to people was having a young girl, a child possessed and doing and saying things that are really disgusting and very adult and very horrible. In this version, the girls don't really do that. I think maybe they made that decision so the actors aren't traumatized, which fair. I don't want actors to be traumatized, but that is completely sort of taken out of this particular version of The Exorcist. The girls, there's maybe a whisper of something gross and adult, but not really. I mean, Linda Blair had to go through some things. These ones don't. So I was like upset.
The subtext of what you're saying here is like, if you don't traumatize the children on set, are you making a horror movie?
Is it real?
Well, listen, we have CGI now. Other things can be done.
But I mean, I would agree with you here that we didn't really care what happened to them, because with Regan in the first one we cared because we're watching this child slowly kind of deteriorate, and we watched her go from such a good kid to just saying the most unbelievable stuff. You're like, she can't say anything worse than that, and you're like, well, there it is. You know what I mean? Wow.
She does.
Oh yeah, over and over.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I'm interested in this because, not to, be all the power of IP compels you about this, but there's something about the Exorcist brand that makes it seem like if you're making a movie in that lineage, a sequel, you've got Ellen Burstyn in this.
Yeah.
This is an open net, right? Like this is like you can score quite easily because you're treading on a legacy.
Yeah.
And the legacy is already going to bring so many people to the theater. So what is it about this movie that you think fails so hard in terms of like living up to the original? Because it seems like the original set a really high bar.
Yeah, well, you nailed it there. I mean, like, I have no sympathy for this movie. Like, it's got the burden of living on the shoulders of giants here, where it's actually has a leg up. You print money with that title.
Yeah, people will go see it.
Yeah, and they pull Ellen Burstyn out every couple of minutes, like, remember me? You know what I mean? I was in it too. They just kind of went, I think, a little too teen, and I don't want to sound like an old man when I say that, but they're trying to introduce new viewers into this franchise, and they're going with the kind of talk to me and the kind of newer style of teen horror, which is fine. There's some great teen horror movies, but in this case, I don't think you can just slap a name on it, make it a placeholder, and then hope that it's going to be a good movie. You still have to make a good movie.
All right, listen, if folks are just joining us, my name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Today on the podcast, we got Jen Sookfong Lee here. We got Matt Hart here. And we're talking about the new Exorcist. Jen, it does not sound like we have particularly favorable opinions of this movie. Did you have a sense of really high expectations going into it?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the original Exorcist was the first movie that, well, not the first, but one of the ones that scared like the pants off me at like 13 or 14 when I first watched it. So I wanted it to really scare me. The trailer was actually quite scary when I watched it before I went to see the movie. Yeah. And I was like, just disappointed in the fact that, the original Exorcist came out in 1973. This one is 2023. And so much of as I said before, good horror is about like taking apart and making weird things that are familiar or comforting to us. And in the first one, that's like religion and like childhood. And in this one, I think they squandered an opportunity. Like what makes teen girls in 2023 really scary? There are a plethora of things they could have used, from social media to sending nudes to selfies to like body image that they did not use that would have been in keeping with the theme, but make it much more horrific and scary and, you know, sort of like on brand for what 2023 is, what we find scary today. And they didn't do it. And I think that's a waste.
Right. The idea is like, if you're going to make a horror that is based on sort of the teen horrors, then do that, right? But they didn't
then
quite
go there.
Right. But they didn't quite do that. I will say, Matt, the other thing that the original Exorcist illustrates so well is how much of what makes a movie actually terrifying lives in our brain, right? Like it's like you cast a thing into my brain and I go, oh no, I'm the person that's disturbed. There's some really incredible recent examples of this. There's a relatively new Canadian horror movie. I don't know if you saw Skinamarink or not.
Of course, yeah.
Okay, so Skinamarink is so much about what you don't see. I want to play you guys a clip from an interview that the filmmaker, his name is Kyle Edward Ball, he did with my pal Tom Power over on Q.
A lot of it is just implication. So maybe something is around the corner. Maybe something is hiding in the dark. And I wanted it to kind of evoke childhood fears.
I love that idea. I love the idea of wanting to evoke childhood fears and there's something lurking in the dark. Talk to me about this idea of implied horror. Why is this so powerful, man?
Well, I always say, you know, the imagination is the scariest place. It's your body's going to do, or your brain's going to do a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to things you can't see.
Right.
You think back to, you know, one of my favorites, I always think back to Blair Witch Project.
Yeah.
And our attention spans are shot now because we can scroll around on our phone and we don't, you know, we're not able to sit and just absorb. Like I do it too. I'm not judging by any stretch here.
Yeah,
but,
you should.
Yeah, but the thing is with that movie, they didn't show anything and we loved that back then.
Yeah.
And now we seem to, Skinamarink, one of the big criticisms was that we don't see anything.
Right.
And you're like, but that's kind of what makes it really scary. It's this unknowable evil.
If you're really in it, you're actually like really clued into everything that's not there. In a sense.
And I don't know if you know it, but quickly it's about, you know, these two kids wake up and all the windows and doors in their house are gone and their parents are gone.
Which is horrifying.
And he filmed it in his childhood home for $15,000, the director.
I'd love to tell you.
For heaven's sake!
And it's horrifying. Nothing that really happens. It's like taking a bath in a mood. You know,
Jen, does that make you go like, I want to watch that?
Yeah, I'll probably watch it. Incidentally, I did make my kid watch Blair Witch Project like last week, and he woke me up. He's like, I'm having nightmares, and I'm like, see, I told you it was scary.
You know what? He deserves it. I'm so glad that he's being introduced to, you know, horror movies of previous generations. Then before we wrap, I want to get into the fundamental paradox of horror here. Horror is not a vibe, a mood bath that people want to take quite often. For people who do love it, why is it that we love to be scared? What's going on there?
I honestly think that in the moment when we're being scared, when something actually scary happens in the movie, that part doesn't feel that great. But afterwards, it feels amazing. You're like, I lived through something, even though you did not. And I think that that's like really it. And I also think that there's something about horror that does really like incisive, like cultural commentary too, right? Like if you're looking at like just talking about the first Exorcist, like it was 1973 when the world was changing rapidly. And all of these things that the world thought were like traditional or were going to stay forever were not. Systems were falling. So the Exorcist took it one step further and said, well, let's take Catholicism apart now. Let's take childhood apart now. And let's explore these spaces where these things are falling apart. So I think that those are the things that we love. We almost, there's a perverse part of our brains that wants to see like, that wants to burn it all down. And that's what horror movies do for us.
I also love the idea that, The Exorcist was taking concepts like childhood and Catholicism apart because that's kind of become a trope, right, Matt? Like we see that in so many different horror movies that were maybe almost too familiar with that conception, but it was sort of groundbreaking when it first came out.
Yeah, and it's just not even just the children in that; it's everyone struggling with their faith in The Exorcist. Both the priests are notoriously conflicted with taking place in the exorcism, and like the younger, it's escaping me, the younger priest who's dealing with his mother's dementia. It's like a really strong part of the film where he's like, I don't know if I believe in anything anymore.
Oof.
Yeah, so I mean that's why that style of movie for me, it's the like it's the BDSM of films. It's the hot sauce or the salt and vinegar of films. You know, you're like, ow. But that's good. Ow.
I was not expecting to hear the phrase the BDSM of films this morning on the radio, but you know what? It's live radio, baby. Anything could happen. 30 seconds to each of you. You're going to tell me about the best horror film ever. Matt, I'll start with you.
Oh, ever? I mean, I'm going to go Blair Witch just because I want to be controversial because a lot of people don't like it and don't think it could exist now. And I agree the marketing couldn't exist now, but that's a great one for your imagination.
Jen's son probably definitely agrees at this point, right? Because you put him through that, and now here we are. What's the best horror film for you, Jen?
Best horror, the one that I hold dearest to my heart is the Amityville Horror, the original one.
Oh,
but
sure.
Also, I'm gonna throw a book in there, Flowers in the Attic. I'm sure it doesn't hold up, but I don't care.
That is a fantastic note to leave it on. In the meantime, Matt, Jen, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Anytime.
Of course.
Thank you.
Matt Hart is in Toronto, and Jen Sookfong Lee is in Burnaby, BC. They're both Commotion regulars and horror fans. Gotta tell you, The Exorcist Believer is playing in select theaters now.
ਬੰਦੇ ਉੱਠਣੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਮਿੰਟੋ ਮਿੰਟ ਪੱਟ ਨਾ ਤੂੰ ਹੱਸ ਬੱਲੀਏ ਕਿਹੜਾ ਕਰਦਾ ਏ ਤੰਗ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਦੱਸ ਬੱਲੀਏ ਸਾਡੇ ਮੈਟਰ 'ਚ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਨਾ ਪੁਲਿਸ ਬੱਲੀਏ ਕਰਦਾ ਏ ਤੰਗ ਕਿਹੜਾ ਦੱਸ ਬੱਲੀਏ ਜੱਟ ਗੈਂਗ ਨਹੀਂ ਬਣਾਉਂਦੇ ਗੈਂਗਾ ਰਨ ਕਰਦੇ ਵੈਪਨ ਰੱਖਿਆ ਚੜਦੇ ਦੋ ਚੜਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਚੱਲਦੇ ਰਕਾਨੇ ਪੂਰੀ ਲਹਿਰ ਫੜਦੇ ਬੰਦੇ ਜਿਗਰੇ ਵਾਲੇ ਆ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਖੜਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਦਿਨ ਢਲਦੇ ਹੀ ਹੋ ਜੇ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਦਿਨ ਬੱਲੀਏ
I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. You are listening to Commotion. What you're hearing right now is a bit of We Rollin'. It's a song that helped make Punjabi-Canadian musician Shubh famous. He's part of this new generation of Punjabi-Canadian hip-hop acts making waves. And I'm not just talking about here in Canada, I'm talking about the global South Asian market. Shubh is having a big year. He dropped his debut album, Still Rollin', and was set to go on tour in India. But that tour was abruptly canceled after a post that he made on Instagram. The post was seen by a lot of his fans as feeding into the tensions between India's Sikh communities and the country's larger populations. And this is coming at a time when the Canadian government is investigating what it calls credible allegations linking India's government to the killing of Sikh leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Sara Grewal has been studying the rise of Canada's Punjabi hip-hop movement. Sara, you're with me now. What's going on, man? How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm happy that you're here. Listen, let me start by saying, what did Shubh post to his IG account that led to all this backlash and to the cancellation of the tour?
So earlier this year, there was a police crackdown in Punjab involving internet and electricity blackouts. And in response, Punjabi digital artist Inquisitive created an art piece on Instagram that depicted a map of India. And there's a policeman standing next to it holding an electrical plug that's been pulled out of a socket. And the other end of that plug is connected to the state of Punjab, which is blacked out on the map. Both Shubh and Inquisitive has stated that the post was meant to comment on the blackout in Punjab. However, the reaction on social media was focused on this distorted map, and it actually ended up deflecting attention away from the crackdown that was going on. So when Shubh reshared this post on Instagram, people took it out of context and wrongfully painted him as inflaming tensions.
I guess let's talk about those tensions for a moment. I know it's hard to summarize decades of tensions in like a few minutes, but can you just briefly lay out some of those tensions that underpin all this backlash to Shubh's post?
Yeah, I mean, I want to bring it back to social conditions. So we see Sikh youth struggling with a lack of viable employment opportunities, as well as an epidemic of drug and alcohol addiction. Coming out of the farmers' protests in Punjab, there have been ongoing protests around the challenges that farmers are facing, particularly around debilitating cycles of debt. And then we see media responding to these protests by activating stereotypes around violence and criminality. So to anyone familiar with hip hop in North America, all of this should sound very familiar. These conditions and this media response are not dissimilar to what we've seen happen with hip hop in the past. So that's kind of the short version of what's going on behind Shubh's post.
And I would say like those are the conditions that made hip hop political in the first place. Like that's what hip hop is responding to a lot of the times in terms of the social conditions, right?
Absolutely.
So Shubh has since apologized. He said that he's not intended to hurt anyone. There's another popular Punjabi-Canadian artist named A.P. Dillon. He's waded into all of this. Here's part of a statement he posted to his IG account. He wrote, here's a quote, special interests and political groups constantly use our artists' public image as a chess piece to further their agenda, while we are just trying to make art that helps people on an individual level, regardless of their color, race, religion, nationality, gender, etc. What do you make of the point there, the point that AP is trying to make?
I think it goes to show how well aware artists are that the context of their music circulation are really politically fraught. But actually, another Punjabi-Canadian rapper has already talked about this exact issue, and that's Sidhu Moosewala, who recently was killed. But in his song Do So Pachanme, or 295, he shows how controversies arise out of the smallest things and are then blown up in the media. And in the song, he claims that this happens specifically to hold Punjabi artists back.
So AP's decision, we should say, to keep politics out of his music, that's not a new one. But even when artists choose to do that, it can still end up showing up in other ways. You say that you see this in the way that artists like Shubh choose to identify. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so one of the questions that arises when we even talk about these artists is, should we refer to them as Punjabi-Canadian artists or Sikh Canadian artists? And what are the resonances of each of those terms? So Punjabi is the language that they're rapping in, and Punjab is the region they're from. And Punjab spans across both India and Pakistan and is inhabited by Muslims, Sikhs, and Hindus. So the marker of Punjabi is a way of calling on the shared cultural and linguistic tradition that cuts across religious difference. On the other hand, Punjab in India today is a majority Sikh state, and the artists that are in the spotlight today are coming from Sikh families. So for Shubh, he wears a turban. That's kind of an inescapable marker of him being Sikh. But in his recent post addressing the controversy, he specifically refers to himself as Punjabi in order to link back to Punjab as an integral part of India. So we have to be really careful here because the artists themselves are identifying as Punjabi for really good and important reasons that we have to take seriously. But on the other hand, the backlash that they're facing is because they're Sikh, not because they're Punjabi.
That was one of the corrections that we sort of had when we were putting together this very segment. This is one of the things that you pointed out. Is like, actually, it's very specific and very intentional of these artists to call themselves Punjabi-Canadians. All of this, we should say, comes at a time when Canada has alleged a very serious allegation that India was behind a plot to kill a Canadian national in Surrey, British Columbia. How do you think, if at all, that diplomatic spat has kind of inflamed some of these tensions with these artists?
Well, for one thing, the timing is interesting. I mean, the controversial post that Shubh shared was circulating back in March and April when tensions were high in Punjab, and things have since cooled down over there. But now the tensions are on the rise in the diaspora. So we see artists having to face consequences now for things that happened earlier this year. So while Shubh did face some backlash at the time earlier this year, I'm not sure his tour would have been canceled now if not for this current diplomatic spat, as you put it.
And I think it's worth mentioning that this is all going on, but there's also this larger context of, Warner Music Canada recently announced this new joint label venture with Warner Music India. This is also going to try to tap into that global South Asian market we were talking about. What do you think of the industry layer in all this? How do you think that might play into these tensions?
Look, if Warner Canada is creating a joint venture with Warner India, it's because they're looking to maximize profit off of Punjabi-Canadian artists. And that also means minimizing political volatility. So there are two things that we can learn from Black American hip-hop history in this regard. Number one, the entrance of hip-hop into the mainstream music industry is coterminous with the censorship of hip-hop, period. And the 1992 incident of Ice-T's Cop Killer being pulled by Warner Music is the clearest example of this, although we don't have time to get into the details of that today. The second point is this venture is likely going to be hailed as a win, as though we've made it. But that desire that we as Punjabi Canadians have to be legitimized by white mainstream institutions like the music industry, I don't think it's going to give us the power that we're hoping for. And often it doesn't even give artists the money they're hoping for. So we've seen Black American rap artists call attention to the exploitative terms of their music contracts. So for me, this Warner Music joint venture deal is really just solidifying the notion that there is a demand for Punjabi music that is profitable. But the question is, will it be profitable for the artists? And even if it is, what are the social, political, and even artistic costs that the artists are going to have to incur in order to achieve that profit?
You brought up the Cop Killer story, and I'm like, oh wow, there's so much to dive into there, and I totally see the relations and the parallel. Sara, I really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for being on Commotion today.
Thank you.
Of course. Sara Grewal is an associate professor at MacEwan University in Edmonton. Her research focuses on hip-hop within the Sikh diaspora. And that is it for the podcast today. Also, in case you've not checked us out on YouTube, we are now available on YouTube. Every episode of the show is available there. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. Hey, I'm going to be here tomorrow. I hope that you're going to be here tomorrow, and then we can get to do this all over again. Hopefully see you then.